What's up, Ballers? Armando here today. I'm just going to give a quick conversation about the webcam format, how to avoid common pitfalls, what to expect, and how you should probably be conducting yourself and expecting the same of others. I've played in 3 webcam tournaments. I did the Channel Fireball, got top second with Peel Off. I did Carta Magica, got top 5 with Dark Broly, and then I did the December finalists and got 9th with Reboot Gohan Hirudegarde. So I've played a lot of webcam games. I do it frequently for testing as well. It can be a good format, and there is a way to be maybe not necessarily competitive, but to be more competitive. So the first thing you want to do is your setup. You want to be able to make sure you can see everything, respect your opponent to see everything. Particularly, I like to be able to see where my hands are and know where my opponent's hands are. Yeah, sure, there are games where you're not going to be able to keep track of your opponent's hands. And there are games where your opponent's going to have, say they have 6 cards in hand, and then it's going to be the 3-drop blue-red Goku that swaps into the 6-drop Invoker. And then there are other 4 cards are going to be Catastrophic Blows. It takes you from 6 life to 0. But that being said, you can do what you can to mitigate cheating and to mitigate getting cheated, making it look like you're cheating. So first things first, at the start of the match, I always ask my opponent to pile shuffle. If you don't know what pile shuffling is, it's when you randomize your cards in piles like I'm doing right now. And the big reason we do this is to stop any kind of improper stacking. Now, again, this isn't a perfect method, but this is probably the best way. 1, you want to make sure your deck's sufficiently randomized. 2, to sufficiently randomize your opponent's decks. So once you're done pile shuffling, obviously you put everything together. I always ask my opponent to do 1 cut down the center. That just, it's the best. Anytime your opponent looks through their deck, 1 cut down the center. It's the best way you can go about any kind of impropriety. Because it's, for example, a 3-way cut, as seen recently in the PPG tournament, right? You can kind of mix it around and make it look, but your top deck's still your top deck. 1 cut down the center, your bottom's going to the top. There's no real way to cheat that. And to be able to slim or pick out an exact card, it's obviously going to be more difficult. So anytime your opponent shuffles or looks through the deck, I always ask for 1 cut down the center. Obviously, you can't cut in person. You can't shuffle their deck in person, so you got to hope for the best. As indicated previously, make sure your hands are visible at all times. That way, there's no impropriety. Right? Like, for example, if I'm doing this, what's to stop me from adding a card to my hand? Right? So try and keep your hands visible at all times. If you do have to move your hands around, I suggest leaving your hand down on the table. That way it doesn't look like you're adding anything to it. You don't really want to have a judge called on you for making it look like you're cheating. And again, it's going to be annoying. Ask your opponent to pile shuffle. Ask your opponent to cut every time. During play, I'll just go through some common pitfalls that I suffered and that I've learned from. So number 1, keep track of your opponent's energy. For example, if your opponent's playing the Zeno Unison and they use the +2 skill to ramp, right? Make sure at the end of the turn that energy goes to the drop area. Ask what their cards and energy are. Ask if they've used their Unison skill. Even if you know, just ask because it never hurts. The big thing too is cards in hand. You should always know what your opponent's cards in hand are. This stops them from adding additional cards or getting additional cards out of anywhere else. I had 1 game where I attacked my opponent, or I asked my opponent cards in hand. He said 6, and I attacked him. He took the hit, and I said cards in hand, and he said 6 + 1 is 7. So he was probably getting frustrated that every turn I was asking him cards in hand. But at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure there weren't any additions or subtractions. So every turn, I'll ask my opponent cards in hand. I'll ask how many cards are in their drop area. That way you can know if they have sparking or not. And I'll ask how many super combos are in their drop area. Now, in a perfect world, we play in person, and I can pick up your drop and look through it and say, okay, his secret rare's in there, he's bursted it, he's got 1 negate in there, odds are he's running 4 or 5 negates. Webcam format, obviously, you don't want to have your opponent show you every card in the drop because it'll be too time consuming. But definitely, I'd suggest ask your opponent how many super combos are in their drop before you make any big plays, and ask your opponent how many cards are in their drop before you make any big plays, so you can determine if they have sparking, or even if it's even if you're defending, ask your opponent how many cards in drop, because they might have 5 cards in drop and try and do a mass Saiyan, or try and do a mass Saiyan overrealm when they need 6. So always be keeping track over what your opponent has where. Unfortunately, it's a situation where if you don't call them on it, they might not own up to it until after the fact, after the game's already done, and there's not much you can do to correct the state at that point. So, again, always keep your hands where you can see them. You just really want to make sure you're doing everything you can as honestly as you can. And again, another big thing is your life. I had a situation once where my opponent's life was stacked like this. So I went in with I dumped on a double strike, and my opponent took 2 life and had 1 remaining that I didn't see. Thankfully, the last card in my hand was Mira, and I played it and was able to win the game with it anyway. But always ask. And again, it might not even be your opponent acting improperly. They might just have their life stacked slightly askew, and you get confused, or you don't see it due to the color of their sleeves. So before attacking or before making any big plays, always ask your opponent cards in life, cards in hand, just so you can have a better idea of their game state. It's frustrating for sure. I'm sure it annoys your opponent, but at the end of the day, it's going to help you win your game, because you need to have as much information you can before before making any kinds of decisions. So just a quick recap. Always ask your opponent to pile shuffle at the start of the match. Anytime your opponent looks through your deck or shuffles, ask them to cut once down the center. Make sure you watch them do it. Every turn, you ask your opponent cards in hand. Every turn, you ask your opponent cards in life. And before making any big plays, you should ask cards in drop, and if they have super combos in the drop area. That way you can help calculate power better. These are just some quick insights that I have. And another thing, like I said, how you should carry yourself. Position your webcam in a way where they can see as much as they can. And obviously, like, it's tough because the webcam's not big enough, so your board might get cramped, or you might end up, if you feel like your board's getting cramped, ask your opponent if they can see anything. Ask your opponent if they want you to move it around. You know what I mean? Have a dialogue with your opponent about the board state. Same thing if you're getting frustrated. If your opponent has 4 blockers out, and one's underneath and the other one's over here, and you think, okay, he's got 2 blockers. You see this this one on the side, you kind of forget about it. Always just ask your opponent, can you reorganize, or how many blockers do you have? Try and be verbal. Try and get a better understanding of the game state. Get a better understanding of the board before you make any big plays. Don't be afraid to ask, what does that do? Can you read it to me? Even seasoned players will sometimes forget the exact wording of their card, or they might be on autopilot. For example, it's been widely seen that people might tap the wrong energy or wrong color. A question I ask a lot is, what's the specific cost for that? To make sure, for example, if my opponent's playing a red-green deck and they're supposed to tap a red but they don't, and then that red ends up staying up for violent rays, or staying up for topo later, when they should never have had it in the first place. So asking your opponent how much specific energy things cost is always good. Asking your opponent to read their card to you is always good. I've never gotten upset when someone's asked me to read a card to them. I've never gotten upset when someone's asked me cards in hand. Even if they ask me 2 or 3 times and it's the same number, I appreciate them being diligent. So you always want to make sure you have an understanding of what your opponent's doing. How you can help mitigate that, when you ask your opponent something, a lot of people do it habitually, pay attention. So they'll ask cards in hand just to get an idea, and then they'll forget and think about comboing and say cards in hand. If you're going to ask them, pay attention. If you're attacking me and you say cards in hand and I say 7, and then you combo a super combo and draw, and then you say cards in hand and I say still 7, obviously at some point I'm going to get frustrated with you. Because you clearly weren't paying attention when I asked the first time. You're just on autopilot while you play, and that's could be indicative of stalling. Another big thing, you can chit chat during your game. That's always fun. Don't do too much of it. You're here to have fun. We're here to play games, but don't tell me a story while we play, unless you can play while you're doing it. You can play well while you're doing it, because I've never drawn in a webcam tournament. I never intend to draw in a webcam tournament. I always play fast decks for webcam because you don't want to end up in a situation where you're playing against, you're playing for a draw when you're X1, because that draw can seriously hinder you. So tips for webcam, be aware of what your opponent's doing. Play a fast deck that you're comfortable with, or play a deck you can play fast. Ask your opponent to pile shuffle. Ask your opponent to cut their deck every time they search, and keep your hands where you can see, where your opponent can see them. Ask your opponent to keep their hands when you can see them. When I play in a webcam tournament, this is exactly what my setup's like, right? And then I pick up my life, and then I'd mulligan 2, shuffle. You don't. Now I would always ask my opponent, "Want me to cut?" and then ask them to cut. But you can just do it automatically after a while. I'm sure if you tell your opponent, I've at the start of the match said, every time I shuffle, I'll cut in half, and they say, yeah, that's good. Draw it back up, you put your life down, you make sure it's as clear as it can be, 4 and 4. And like I said, it's nice to tell your opponent how much life you're at. You don't have to, but you should definitely be asking your opponent how much life they're at as you play. Because like, you don't want to end up in a situation like me where I dumped on a double strike, and then he took 2 and had 1 remaining. So you only have to do that once to kind of learn from your mistakes. I do like webcam format. I think it's superior to online clients. I think we bought our cards to play with them and move them around. So it doesn't really make sense to me to have the decks and then not physically play with them. It sucks that you can't really trust anybody anymore, but try and give your opponent credit. I'm sure I've had opponents who kept freezing while we play, and again, I've called a judge because of it. It's not that the opponent was necessarily doing anything wrong. It's just if he had 5 or 6 freezes while we played, I can't keep track of what's going on while they're frozen. And when you call a judge, if it keeps freezing, you can ask the judge what to do next, or if it stops freezing when you call a judge, then great, your problem's fixed. Definitely keep track of what your opponent's doing, keep track of their cards in hand, card in life, and I think everybody should play in webcam tournaments. They're a lot of fun. You can play with people all over the world. It's less of a cost investment, less of a time investment than going to a tournament in person. I have a lot of fun when I play in them, and I think everybody should at least give it a shot. But if you have any questions, feel free to shoot a message to the page, or check out my blog, or otherwise leave a comment on the video. Thanks, guys. I hope everybody has a good luck in their upcoming games, and until the next tournament, you guys keep balling.